Welcome back to Ethical Point. Today, we're diving into a masterclass explainer on navigating ethical friction as a civil servant, and we've tailored this specifically for your general studies paper IB preparation. Look, if you're an aspiring bureaucrat, you already know the real world isn't just black and white. It's a whole lot of gray. So today, we're going to unpack the dense theory behind ethical dilemmas and, more importantly, translate it into high-scoring tactics for your exam. Sound good? Let's dive in.
We've got a highly structured roadmap for you today. We'll be defining the ethical dilemma, looking at the different types, and exploring sectoral dilemmas. Then we'll cover foundational values, their cultural sources, including SARC, and finally, wrap up with strategies for cracking the UPSC mains.
All right, part 1, defining the ethical dilemma. Before we can solve a problem, we need to know exactly what it looks like. Let's kick things off with the classic trolley problem, just to see what an ethical paradox actually looks like in action. Imagine this. A runaway trolley is hurtling toward 5 workmen on the tracks. You're standing on a bridge above, next to a large stranger. If you do nothing, 5 people die. If you push the stranger to stop the trolley, 1 person dies, but you actively caused it. Now, playing the skeptic, you might ask me, wait, am I just confused about what the right thing to do is? But as your mentor, I need you to understand that this is not confusion. It's a true paradox. Literally, any choice you make here is going to transgress a moral principle.
So, what's the formal definition? An ethical dilemma is a decision-making problem where 2 possible moral imperatives are in conflict, and neither is unambiguously acceptable. Here is your layman's definition for the exam. It's not a simple choice between good and bad. It's about choosing the best among the worst possible outcomes.
Now, this is a trap so many students fall into, confusing a dilemma with, well, mere confusion. Confusion stems from a lack of knowledge, wrong assumptions, or maybe just poorly interpreted regional laws. A dilemma, on the other hand, exists purely because a perfect solution simply doesn't exist. You have all the facts, the laws are clear, but your moral imperatives still crash right into each other.
Moving on to Section 2, Types of Ethical Dilemmas. Let's categorize the specific types of friction you're actually going to encounter.
Okay, before we look at the types, how do you even know you're in a dilemma? Well, 3 simultaneous conditions must be met. First, it has to be an inevitable situation demanding a decision. Second, you need different courses of action to choose from. And third, any choice you make compromises an ethical principle. The absolutely crucial takeaway here, if you aren't forced to make a decision or if you can literally just walk away, it's not a dilemma. You have to be completely trapped by these 3 conditions. Once you're trapped, you'll generally face one of 2 main types. If you're skeptical and want some real-world proof, let's look at them in action. An absolute dilemma is when 2 pure ethical standards conflict. Picture a doctor at an isolated tribal camp, lacking resources to treat a sick child. The ethics of providing care clash heavily with the ethics of medical competency and limited resources. Then you have an approximate dilemma. This is when your ethics conflict with laws or policies. For instance, you promise to protect a whistleblower's identity, but a new protection law requires you to reveal them to a court for an official inquiry. Your personal ethical promise is now clashing with your hard legal obligation. Section 3, Sectoral Dilemmas. Next up, let's map out exactly where these ethical concerns pop up in government and private institutions. If you see a question about institutional ethics in your mains, use these exact scenarios to show how friction happens on the ground. First, administrative discretion. An official having to balance a citizen's freedom of expression against maintaining democratic order. Second, information leaks. An employee facing the dilemma of breaking a colleague's trust versus remaining loyal to a company's ethical vision. Think of recent pharmaceutical whistleblowing cases. Third, public accountability. Navigating the constant tension between the misuse of right-to-information laws and officials trying to hide wrongful acts behind the shield of personal privacy. All right, Section 4, Foundational Values for Civil Servants. How do you actually resolve these sectorial dilemmas? To resolve this friction, an aspiring bureaucrat needs an aptitude grounded in foundational values. Let's rapid fire through them, starting with integrity. You might read this, being honest and having strong moral principles, and think, okay, that sounds pretty basic. But as your mentor, I'll point out that in practice, integrity means actively avoiding external financial or personal obligations. It's the shield. It prevents influential interest groups from hijacking government land or policies for their own private gain. Next, let's define impartiality and non-partisanship together so you can really see the distinction. Impartiality is the equal treatment of all rival and disputant groups. This builds massive trust, especially among marginalized classes who might not have a loud voice in the media. Non-partisanship, however, is strict political neutrality. It ensures administrative continuity and rational decision-making, regardless of which political party happens to hold power today. Then we have objectivity and dedication. Objectivity means making your decisions strictly based on facts, evidence, and merit. It completely removes cognitive biases, memory errors, and the influence of our own feelings. Dedication is your relentless commitment to public service. It's that vital human driving force that keeps you going, even when government funds dry up, your discretion is limited, and the outside political pressure is just mounting. Now hold on, let's clearly define the difference between these next two for the exam. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, literally putting yourself in their shoes to understand their pain. But compassion, also known as karuna in Vedic traditions, goes a step further. And this brilliantly illustrates the progression of an administrator. Empathy is feeling the pain, but compassion is taking the actual, realistic action to remove that harm and provide a healing treatment.
Finally, tolerance. This is simply the willingness to tolerate opinions or behaviors you personally dislike. In a world divided into intense religious and ideological blocks, tolerance is what protects a nation from violent clashes. It ensures a civil servant remains neutral and highly effective, even during really volatile power transitions.
Section 5. Cultural Sources and SARC. Where do all these foundational values actually come from, and how do they fit into modern frameworks? Humans are born with neutral values, right? We learn them from our environment, and our cultural sources are incredibly rich. Now, you might play the skeptic again and point out how diverse these sources are, but look at how perfectly they all align. The Vedas teach an awareness of duty and the welfare of all creatures. The Bhagavad Gita outlines divine qualities like fearlessness and compassion, contrasting them with demoniac qualities of arrogance. Fast forward to today, and the Constitution acts as our modern moral compass, demanding justice, equality, and fundamental duties. And of course, we learn directly from the lives of great role models, leaders, and reformers.
If you want to score high, you absolutely need institutional backing. Drop this exact quote from the fourth report of the Second Administrative Reforms Commission, or SARC, directly into your answers. It states that good governance can be reality only when built on the ethical values enshrined in our Dharma and the Constitution. This proves to the examiner that ethics and governance isn't just fluffy philosophy. It's hard, recommended institutional policy. Okay, the home stretch, Section 6, cracking the UPSC mains. Let's translate all this dense theory into actual scoring tactics for the exam room. Introductions are critical. You want to show depth immediately. Use heavy-hitting quotes, like this one from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. The line separating good and evil passes not between states nor between classes, but through the middle of every human heart. Or you could mention Gladstone's idea that the purpose of government is to make it easy for people to do good and difficult to do evil. Quotes like these elevate your introductions way beyond a standard, boring textbook definition. Let's see how this builds your actual answer structure, specifically for closing out a 10 or 15 marker. Here is your cheat code for a conclusion. Step 1, clearly acknowledge the core ethical dilemma. Identify the exact friction, like administrative discretion versus freedom of expression. Step 2, inject a foundational value as the tool for resolution. Maybe apply objectivity to remove bias, or compassion to find a realistic solution. Step 3, propose a balanced way forward, definitively citing SARC recommendations or constitutional ideals to really ground your answer in policy.
We're going to wrap up this explainer with a final provocative thought drawn directly from the texts. As your deep, driving desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. As your deed is, so is your destiny. The ultimate challenge isn't just memorizing these foundational values, right? It's internalizing them so deeply that they shape your deeds when you face those absolute and approximate dilemmas. So how will you shape your destiny in the exam room? Thank you for joining us on Ethical Point, and keep striving for that perfect balance of empathy, objectivity, and integrity.